She was forced to marry a cold millionaire in court. But on their wedding night, everything changed. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. She stood inside the courthouse, her hands trembling as she clutched the pen. The sound of her heartbeat drowned out the buzzing whispers around her. Every eye in the room was fixed on her. The poor girl forced into an arrangement she never wanted. She lifted her chin, refusing to let her tears fall. At the opposite table sat the man she was about to marry. His suit was pressed to perfection, his face carved in stone, and his eyes colder than winter rain. He did not glance at her, not even once. To him, this was not marriage. It was business. The judge's voice echoed across the chamber, asking her to sign. The document trembled in her hand. She remembered her mother's hospital bills stacked on the kitchen table. She remembered the letters from creditors threatening to take everything away. She remembered her younger brother, still in school, who had looked at her with silent fear when the men in black suits came knocking on their broken door. With no other way out, she signed. The ink spread across the page, sealing her fate. The millionaire leaned forward and pressed his signature with steady precision, as if he were signing another corporate contract. When he finished, he closed the pen, pushed the paper away, and rose from his chair without a single word. The room gasped when he walked straight past her, his polished shoes striking the floor like thunder. He did not offer his arm. He did not acknowledge her existence. It was as though she were nothing but a shadow attached to his name. The crowd erupted outside the courthouse doors. Reporters shoved microphones forward. Flashes lit up like lightning. And the headlines had already been written before the ink on the contract dried. Cold millionaire marries a nobody. Fortune meets failure in courtroom wedding. Cameras zoomed in on her pale face, searching for a sign of shame. She tried to hold her ground, clutching the small silver ring he had ordered for her. It was far too large for her thin fingers. It slid loosely, icy against her skin, a reminder that this was never meant to fit. She followed him into the waiting car. The door slammed shut behind her. Inside the luxury vehicle, the air was colder than the December wind outside. He stared out the tinted window, his jaws set tight. "Understand this," he finally said, his voice sharp as glass. "This is a contract, nothing more. Do not expect kindness. Do not interfere with my life. You will live under my roof, but you will never step into my world." Her chest tightened at his words, but she forced herself to answer. "I understand." The car sped through the city, leaving behind the courthouse, the reporters, and the pieces of the life she once knew. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass and let the city blur into streaks of light. She was now the wife of a man who would never love her. A millionaire with a heart locked behind walls higher than any skyscraper he owned. And yet, deep inside, a fragile spark whispered that fate was never so simple. This was only the beginning. The car rolled to a stop in front of a mansion that seemed to rise endlessly into the night sky. Its gates were tall iron. Its walls built of pale stone that glowed under the soft golden lights. She had never seen a place so vast. The steps leading to the front doors looked as if they belonged to a courthouse more than to a home. When the chauffeur opened her door, the sharp chill of the evening struck her skin. She followed her new husband up the long stairs, each step echoing in her chest like a warning. Inside, the silence was heavier than the marble columns. Portraits of men in suits stared down from the walls, stern and judgmental, as if reminding her that she did not belong here. A line of servants stood waiting, their heads bowed low for the master. But when their eyes slid toward her, the bows vanished into cold curiosity. Whispers followed her every step, sharp as daggers hidden behind polite smiles. He removed his coat, handed it to a butler without a word, and finally turned to her. His gaze was detached, almost businesslike. "This marriage is only a legal arrangement. Do not mistake it for anything more. You will have a room on the West Wing. Meals will be served at fixed hours. You may eat or you may not. It makes no difference to me. Do not attempt to enter my study, and above all, do not meddle in my affairs. Do we understand each other? Her throat was dry, but she managed to nod. Yes, I understand. His voice cut the air like the snap of a lock. In return, your family debts will be erased, and your mother's medical care will be taken care of. That was the bargain. You signed it in court, and now you will live it under this roof. Her chest tightened. She thought of her mother lying in a hospital bed, fighting to breathe without the machines. She thought of her brother, still a boy, carrying the weight of their family struggles on his thin shoulders. For their sake, she had to endure this cold prison of luxury. A servant approached with a small velvet box. Inside was the wedding ring he had chosen for her. She slipped it onto her finger again. The metal felt like ice. It was too large, slipping with every movement, as if even the ring itself refused to acknowledge her place here. She tried to hide the way it slid, but he noticed. His eyes lingered on her hand, then flicked away without comment. You will keep it on at all times, he ordered. No matter how false this union feels to you, the world must see it as real, she whispered. The servants dispersed, leaving only the two of them in the vast hall. For a moment, she thought she saw something flicker in his expression. Some shadow of pain quickly buried. Then he turned on his heel and walked away. His footsteps fading into the endless corridors of the mansion. Left alone, she looked up at the crystal chandelier hanging far above her head. The light refracted into 1,000 shards, blinding her eyes. It felt like a mirror of her life now, dazzling on the surface, but cutting her heart with every angle. That night, she unpacked the few belongings she had brought with her. A faded photograph of her family, a scarf her mother had knitted before the illness, a sketchbook she kept hidden, filled with drawings of places she had never visited. She placed them carefully on the nightstand of the room that would never feel like hers. The silence pressed against her ears. She pulled the too large ring tighter onto her finger, whispering to herself that she would endure. She would survive this cold contract no matter how long it lasted. But somewhere in the depth of her heart, a quiet thought lingered. A thought she dared not voice. Could there ever be something real hidden inside this marriage built on paper and ice? The morning sun poured through the tall windows of the west wing, flooding her room with golden light. She sat at the edge of the bed, her eyes swollen from a night without sleep. The mansion was alive with sound, servants moving swiftly, the clatter of dishes being set, the distant hum of engines from the garage. Yet in her corner of the estate, silence pressed heavy against her chest. She dressed modestly, choosing the plainest dress she had brought from home. As she stepped into the hallway, two maids passing by paused to stare. Their whispers floated behind her like smoke. She is the contract wife. She is only here because of the debts. Their words stung, but she lifted her chin and walked on. At breakfast, the long dining table stretched farther than her eyes could follow. He sat at the far end, immaculate in a dark suit, sipping coffee without a glance in her direction. Platters of food filled the table. Eggs, toast, fruits, and meats she could not name. Yet the distance between them felt greater than the length of the room. She forced herself to sit, but every bite stuck in her throat. The butler cleared his throat softly. "Madam, would you like more tea?" The word struck her. Madam, it felt foreign, as though it belonged to another woman in another life. She shook her head. "No, thank you." Across the table, he finally spoke. "The staff will obey you as long as you carry yourself with dignity. If you give them a reason to doubt you, they will not respect you. Remember that." His tone was detached, but his eyes were sharp, measuring her like another business acquisition. "I did not come here to be respected," she answered quietly. "I only came to keep my family alive." The words seemed to land heavier than she expected. His jaw tightened, and for the briefest moment, silence replaced his cold demeanor. But just as quickly, he looked away, returning to his breakfast as if nothing had been said. Later that day, she wandered through the halls of the mansion, careful not to enter forbidden rooms. Every corridor was lined with portraits, statues, and polished mirrors that reflected her small figure back at her. She paused in the grand library, its shelves towering with books that smelled of leather and dust. As she traced her fingers over the spines, A voice startled her. "You like to read?" She turned. One of the junior maids stood timidly at the door. The girl's face was soft, her uniform plain compared to the elegance of the senior staff. "Yes," she admitted. "Reading takes me away from places like this." The maid smiled faintly before her expression grew cautious. "Be careful. Not everyone here wants you to feel at home. Some of them think you do not deserve this place." The warning settled like ice in her veins. But instead of anger, she felt a quiet defiance stir within her. She had survived humiliation before. She had faced hunger, debt collectors, and the shame of poverty. She would not let whispers in a gilded hall destroy her spirit. That evening she found herself in the garden. Roses climbed the stone walls, their fragrance heavy in the air. She sat alone on a bench, her sketchbook resting on her lap. With careful strokes, she began to draw the world as she saw it. The towering mansion, the roses bending toward the setting sun, and her own shadow cast long on the ground. Behind her, footsteps crunched on the gravel. She did not turn, but she felt his presence. He stopped a few paces away, watching silently. For a moment, she wondered if he would speak, but he said nothing. When she finally looked up, his eyes flickered to the sketchbook, then to her face. Without a word, he walked away, leaving only the fading sound of his shoes on the path. She closed the book and held it tightly to her chest. The mansion might try to break her, but she would not let it erase who she was. She would endure the coldness, the whispers, and the endless gulf between her and the man she had married. And somewhere deep inside, she sensed that he too was fighting battles she could not yet see. The following days unfolded like a delicate war between silence and unspoken words. She moved through the mansion quietly, keeping her presence small. Yet somehow her existence continued to ripple through its grand halls. The servants still whispered, but her calm dignity began to unsettle them. She was not broken, as they expected. She held herself with quiet grace, answering their stares with steady eyes. One evening, she found herself in the kitchen. The staff had long finished their work, and the vast counters gleamed under the dim lights. She rolled up her sleeves and prepared a simple meal with the few ingredients she could find. The scent of garlic, onions, and fresh herbs filled the air. It was nothing like the extravagant dishes served at the dining table. It was warm, humble, and human. She was stirring the pot when a voice came from behind. "What are you doing here?" She spun, startled, and nearly dropped the spoon. He stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. His suit jacket was gone, his tie loosened, and his sleeves rolled just enough to show that the night had worn him down. I was cooking," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I wanted something simple, something that tastes like home." For a long moment, he said nothing. His eyes flickered to the pot, then back to her face. "This is not your duty. The staff handles the meals." "I know," she said softly. "But sometimes food is not just about duty. Sometimes it is about comfort." His gaze lingered on her, and though his mouth did not soften, there was a hesitation in his stance. He stepped closer, drawn by the aroma. Without asking, he took the spoon from her hand and tasted the broth. She held her breath, waiting for criticism. Instead, he stood still as though surprised by the warmth spreading across his tongue. "It is different," he finally said. The words were quiet, almost reluctant. "Different is not always bad," she replied gently. He set the spoon down and turned away as if catching himself before allowing anything more to slip through. "Do not waste your time here," he said, his voice regaining its steel. "This mansion does not need your touch." But when he left, she noticed that he had taken the bowl with him. Later that night, as she walked through the halls, she overheard a heated conversation near his study. His voice, usually calm and controlled, carried a sharp edge. "If I hear one more word about her being unworthy, you will find yourself without employment. She may be my wife by contract, but she is under my protection. Do you understand?" The silence that followed was heavy. She pressed her back against the wall, her heart pounding. He had defended her, not for love, but for principle. Still, it was the first time someone with power had spoken in her defense. When she returned to her room, she opened her sketchbook again. She drew the scene from memory, him standing tall, his shadow stretching across the corridor, shielding her from a storm she had not even seen coming. The next morning, as she passed through the dining hall, she noticed a small detail that made her pause. At the far end of the table, beside his usual cup of coffee, sat an empty bowl. The same bowl she had seen him carry from the kitchen. No one said a word, and neither did he, but the message was clear. Somewhere beneath the armor of his coldness, a crack had formed. And though he would never admit it, he had begun to notice her not as a burden, but as something he could not quite ignore. She held on to that thought, small and fragile, like a seed waiting for the Sunday. In this marriage built on contracts and conditions, kindness had quietly made its first appearance. The night of their wedding had come and gone in silence. The world outside whispered rumors of passion and scandal, but the truth was different. Behind the closed doors of the Grandmaster bedroom, there had been no cold command, no forced intimacy. Instead, there had been a quiet distance filled with words that mattered more than actions. She entered the room nervously, expecting the weight of her fate to crush her. He was already there, seated by the window, his tie undone, his gaze fixed on the city lights below. The tension in the air was sharp yet not cruel. When she approached, her heart pounding, he spoke without turning. "You may take the bed. I will not touch you." His voice was steady, but beneath it lay something she could not define. For a moment, she stared at him, uncertain if it was relief or humiliation that washed over her. She gathered her courage. "Why marry me then? Why bind me to a contract if you planned only distance?" He finally turned, his eyes shadowed by the glow of the city. "Because control is safer than chaos. Because marriage, even false, keeps certain enemies at bay. You were convenient. Nothing more." Her chest tightened, but she did not cry. Instead, she lowered her gaze and whispered, "I understand." She slipped beneath the heavy covers, the ring loose on her finger glinting in the dim light. She waited for the sound of his steps retreating to another room, but instead, she heard the creak of the chair as he sat back down. Hours passed in silence. Finally, she could not bear it any longer. "Do you always watch the city at night?" she asked softly. He did not move. "The city does not sleep. It reminds me that I cannot either." His answer lingered in the darkness. For the first time, she heard not the coldness of his tone, but the weariness buried deep inside. She wanted to ask more, but fear held her tongue. Instead, she closed her eyes, letting the steady rhythm of his presence carry her into restless dreams. When dawn broke, the sunlight spilled across the room. She woke to find the chair empty, yet on the nightstand rested a folded blanket. He had covered her during the night when the chill crept in. Her hand brushed the soft fabric, and for a fleeting second, warmth bloomed in her chest. Later that morning, their paths crossed in the corridor. He said nothing, only gave a brief nod before striding past, but she noticed the faintest shift in his expression, as though he too remembered the quiet of the night. That evening, as she sat sketching in the garden, he appeared again. This time, he did not walk away. Instead, he lowered himself onto the bench beside her. "You draw," he said simply. She closed the book slightly embarrassed. "It helps me breathe." He glanced at the page, his eyes softening for the first time. "You see the world differently." "Or maybe," she replied, her voice gentle, "I just try to see what others overlook." The silence that followed was not heavy, but fragile, like glass holding light. For the first time since the courthouse, she felt that the wall between them had cracked. Not destroyed, not broken, but cracked just enough for something human to slip through. That night, when she returned to her room, she placed the sketchbook on the nightstand beside the blanket he had left. Two small tokens of a shift neither dared to name. In a house built on contracts and cold rules, something real had begun to stir, quiet, unspoken, but undeniably alive. The days that followed moved slowly, yet something unspoken began to change between them. Their marriage remained a contract in name, but the silence no longer cut as sharply as before. Instead, it began to shift into something quieter, something almost fragile. One morning, she stepped into the kitchen early, long before the staff began their work. She was mixing flour and milk, determined to create the simple pancakes her mother once made on weekends. When he entered unexpectedly, she froze, her hands dusted in white powder. "You are here again," he said, his voice low, but without the edge it once carried. She forced a small smile. "I wanted to cook breakfast. Something ordinary, something human." "No," he approached, studying the skillet where the batter sizzled. "Ordinary," he repeated, as if the word itself was foreign to him. For a moment he stood in silence, then reached for a plate and waited. She placed 2 pancakes before him, golden and imperfect, nothing like the flawless dishes the chef usually prepared. He tasted them without expression, then set down his fork. "It is not bad," he said simply, her lips curved into the smallest smile. To anyone else, the words might have seemed dismissive, but to her, they carried weight. For the first time, he had acknowledged her effort without disdain. Later that week, she accompanied him to a business event. Cameras flashed as they stepped out of the car together. Reporters shouted questions, eager to see cracks in their unusual union. She felt the weight of every eye, but before she could falter, he offered his arm. The gesture was formal, almost mechanical, but to the watching crowd, it spoke of unity. She took it, her fingers trembling against his sleeve. Inside the event, conversations swirled like storms. She overheard cruel whispers. "She is only a contract wife. She does not belong here." Her cheeks burned, but she kept her posture straight. To her surprise, he leaned close, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "Do not look down. Let them break themselves against your strength." "Oh," the words steadied her. She walked through the glittering room with her head high, his presence beside her like a shield. At home that night, she found him sitting alone in the library, the fire casting long shadows across his face. For once, he did not dismiss her. Instead, he gestured to the chair opposite him. "Sit," he said. They spoke little at first. She asked about the books that lined the shelves, and to her surprise, he answered. She learned he had once loved literature before his life became consumed by contracts in boardrooms. He in turn asked about her drawings. She hesitated, then showed him a page from her sketchbook. His gaze lingered on the lines, and though he said little, there was a softness in his eyes she had never seen before. From then on, their routine changed. They shared small moments. Breakfast in the kitchen, brief walks in the garden, evenings by the fire. She began to see glimpses of the man behind the cold exterior, the man who carried wounds he never spoke of. One night, as rain lashed against the windows, she found herself standing beside him on the balcony. He looked out at the storm with the same distance he once showed her. "Do you ever wonder?" she asked, "if life could have been different?" His jaw tightened. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he whispered almost to himself. "Every day," the answer lingered between them, heavy and raw. She turned her face toward the rain, her heart aching, not just for herself, but for the lonely man beside her. Their marriage had begun as paper and ice. Yet slowly through these quiet exchanges, it was becoming something else, something that neither of them dared to name. But both could feel something real. The fragile peace between them could not last forever. The world beyond the mansion walls was watching, waiting for the chance to strike. That chance came one afternoon when headlines spread like wildfire across every newspaper and television screen. "Contract marriage exposed." The words glared from the front page. Accompanied by photographs of their courthouse wedding. Documents had been leaked, revealing the agreement that had bound them together. The public devoured every detail, and the whispers grew into roars. By the time she entered the city with him for a scheduled charity gala, the reporters had already gathered like vultures. Cameras flashed, voices shouted accusations. "Is it true you married her for convenience? Did she marry you for money? Is she nothing more than a fraud?" She froze, her body trembling under the weight of their scorn. The same cruel words she had endured in the mansion now echoed from strangers across the city. She tried to step forward, but her legs felt heavy, as though each word chained her to the ground. Beside her, he remained outwardly calm, though she felt the tension radiating from him. For years, he had hidden behind his coldness, letting the world believe whatever it wanted. But now the accusations were directed at her, and for the first time she saw something dangerous flicker in his eyes. Inside the gala, the The storm continued. Wealthy guests whispered openly, their laughter sharp as glass. She heard the word gold digger more than once. A woman in a glittering gown brushed past her, muttering, "She will never be one of us." Her chest tightened and shame threatened to crush her. She excused herself, fleeing to a quiet corridor where the noise faded. She pressed her hand against the wall, struggling to breathe. The ring on her finger slipped once more, mocking her, reminding her that she did not belong in his world. She did not know he had followed. When his voice came from behind, it carried a rare intensity. "Do not let them break you." Tears blurred her vision. "How can I not? They're right. I am nothing to them. I was only ever part of a bargain." For a long moment, silence hung between them. Then slowly he stepped closer. His eyes burned with something fierce, something protective. "You may have signed a contract, but you are not nothing. And I will not allow them to treat you as if you are." It was the first time he had spoken such words aloud. The cold armor he wore was beginning to crack, and she could see the man beneath it, a man who could no longer stand by while the world tore her apart. But the battle was only beginning. The contract had been exposed, and soon they would both have to face the consequences. The pressure mounted quickly after the contract was exposed. Headlines screamed betrayal. Talk shows dissected every detail. And the powerful families who once courted his influence now looked at him with suspicion. For her it was worse. She became the target of cruel jokes. A nameless girl branded as an opportunist who had clawed her way into wealth. The board of his company demanded a statement. The press demanded answers. He had spent his life protecting his image, guarding his empire behind walls of stone. But for the first time, the storm was not about business. It was about her. The breaking point came during a press conference arranged to calm the scandal. Rows of cameras lined the hall, flashes sparking like lightning as he stepped onto the stage. She stood at his side, her hands clenched together, her heart hammering. The questions began at once, sharp and merciless. Is it true this marriage was nothing more than a contract? Did you pay her family's debts to secure her compliance? Is she only a wife on paper? The crowd jeered, their voices rising. She wanted to disappear. Her ring slipped again on her trembling finger, threatening to fall. She reached to steady it, but before she could, he reached for her hand. His fingers closed firmly around hers, steady and unyielding. "Yes," he said into the sea of microphones. The room fell silent at the power of his voice. "Yes, this marriage began as a contract. I will not deny it. But what the world does not see, what you all refuse to believe, is that the contract is no longer what binds us." Gasps rippled through the room. He turned, his gaze fixed on her, his voice stronger than she had ever heard it. "Love her. She is not a fraud. She is not a mistake. She is the only person who has ever dared to look past my wealth and see me for who I am. She is my wife in every way that matters." The words struck like thunder. For years he had hidden behind silence, but now he had shattered it in front of the world, and as if to seal the truth, he reached into his pocket and drew out a ring box. Inside gleamed a new band crafted perfectly to fit her hand. He slid it onto her finger with deliberate care. This time the metal hugged her skin snug and sure as if it had been waiting all along. The flashes roared again, but the noise could not drown the moment. For the first time since the courthouse, she felt the ground beneath her steady. His declaration had not only protected her, it had rewritten their story. The contract might have brought them together, but it was love that now held them in place, and the world, whether it believed or not, could no longer take that away. The storm that once threatened to destroy them slowly began to fade. After his public declaration, the voices of doubt lost their sharpness. The same newspapers that had mocked her now printed photographs of the moment he slipped the new ring onto her finger, calling it a scene of defiance and love. The whispers inside the mansion fell silent as well. Servants who had once judged her now bowed with genuine respect. No longer daring to call her unworthy, she walked through the halls without fear. For the first time, the portraits that lined the walls seemed less accusing. She was no longer a stranger forced into a contract. She was his wife in truth and in name. One evening, she returned to the kitchen where it had all begun. She prepared the same simple meal she had made before, her hands steady as she stirred the pot. When he entered, she smiled and placed a plate before him. He sat down without hesitation, eating beside her at the modest counter instead of the endless dining table. "This tastes like home," he said quietly. Her heart warmed at the words. It was not the mansion, nor the wealth, nor the ring that made her feel safe. It was his presence, his acceptance, and the simple act of sharing food made with care. Later that week, they visited her mother in the hospital. The doctors spoke of her recovery with hope, for the treatments were no longer delayed by unpaid bills. Her mother took her hand, her eyes filled with tears of relief, and whispered, "You look happy." For the first time in a long while, she could answer truthfully, "I am." Back at the mansion, she placed her sketchbook on the dining table after supper. He picked it up, flipping through the pages with quiet interest. Among the drawings was one she had finished recently, a picture of the two of them standing in the garden, the mansion behind them, the roses blooming around their shadows. He lingered on that page the longest, tracing the lines with his finger. "You see us differently," he murmured. "I see us as we are," she replied. He looked at her, then truly looked, and for once his eyes were free of the walls that had caged him for so long. He reached across the table, taking her hand in his, not as part of a bargain, but as a promise. Their marriage had begun as ink on paper, cold and calculated, but now it was something deeper. It was built on honesty, on courage, and on the fragile but undeniable truth of love. And as they stood together beneath the crystal chandelier that once blinded her with loneliness, he kissed her gently, sealing not a contract, but a future they would face side by side. If you loved this story, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss our tales of love, second chances, and destiny. Every story proves that love finds a way, even when all odds are against it.